Today we're going to just reflect on AI equality efforts. And I will be presenting it today, but of course with help from Emma and Marie and Louise also in the preparation. With Louise having connection issues and Marie also popping in and out, perhaps at the end we can have like a more proper introduction from the collaborators. Just to be sure we keep the flow going. So what we will do today is I wanted to start with an icebreaker because we want to interact with you today. So let's already get you involved, think about the relevant questions. Then I'll have indeed this short proposed intersectional prose because we wrote like a publication of a paper to discuss what can AI expert actually do for intersectionality, this concept rooted in Black feminist theory and action. Then we'll have some question time to make sure that we understand each other, and then we'll get into your reflection. Do you think these recommendations are also useful? Are they reflecting your priorities? And are there things that perhaps are missing that you would like to be added? So we'll start with this through Menti, if Marie managed to come back. Otherwise, I think we can also do a moment in the chat to start, or people can raise their hand if they want. I cannot see.
Yeah, I can. Let's see if I can enter the. I'm currently on Menti. I'm just trying to put the code in to see whether we can.
Joined with the camera also. Yay!
Nice. Amazing. Perfect.
Yeah, I would like to invite you to get the menti.com, or Marie, if you would like to take over, you're very welcome to do so.
Yes, please. So it would be great if you open the menti.com and enter the code, as Stephen said already. There are 5 questions in it, so please take some minutes to answer these 5 questions, and afterwards I'm happy to share my screen and we can go over the results pretty quick. Stephen, would you allow me to share my screen and I can show the responses?
How to stay in the 5-word with the last question.
Yes.
Okay, I think we can start having a quick look at the responses. I'm curious. So the first question was, how would you describe your role in maximum of 5 words? So let's see, we have one postdoc researcher, AI education consultant, software engineer for AI solutions, PhD, project manager, and one student recognition theory. Great. So I think we have a quite diverse set of roles in here, all somehow working in the field of AI. That's great. Okay, so next question. How much room does your work or research environment have to make mistakes? Oh, wow, I think it's quite a Gaussian distribution. So yeah, somewhere in the middle, but with a lean towards plenty of room for mistakes. That's great to hear. We will come back to this later. Have you had a mentor that has helped you realize the mistake with grace? 3 said yes, that's also great. Nobody said no. And some of you not sure. Okay. Then, have you ever read an article, blog comment, or video that your way of doing or your work or study is wrong? This is more distributed. Some say yes, some say no, some say not sure. Okay, thank you. And the last one, what is the one skill we wish people in AI design could magically have from tomorrow onwards? That's interesting. We see empathy, critical thinking, focusing on values, okay. Acknowledging AI is not the solution for everything, and some awareness of which insights or lived experiences they do not have. Okay, thank you very much for these questions. And I think we can now jump into the content. Stephen.
Yeah. Ooh. This was great, Marie. Thank you so much. And everyone we have a really diverse group and already a lot of nice hooks, I think, to continue the discussion. Let me share my screen again before I start very enthusiastically going to the slides by myself. Yes, so what is this proposed intersectional approach? Let's dive into that now. But before we start, I wanted to make sure we are all a little bit on the ground with AI. I think we, as being in the AI Inequality Hub, are quite aware that there's quite some magical thinking about what AI is. So I wanted to start with my personal definition, how I use it in my head, is that it's some type of software that's really based on a lot of physical data centers or physical data in your computer that based on the information of people or things that we give it, it will perform a task that we decide to give it. And that is so flexible because we can give it different data, such as which emails are spam and which emails are not spam. And then an algorithm will also perform that task, showing these emails are close to the bad ones. We're gonna put them in a special folder. And so it can also be used for printers who are maybe malfunctioning. There's a lot of sensors, a lot of data, information that we give it specifically, and then we relate it to a task. Perhaps if some anomalies are in those sensors, we cannot wait for the quarterly maintenance of the printer and we need to send someone. But we can also decide to give it a lot of information on people. For example, people we have policed before and people we have not policed before. And what kind of task will we give it then? Will we give it a task to decide who is most similar to a profile someone has policed before and even give it a label of a potentially criminal? Those are questions we are asking. And this is also what an AI can be in terms of a chatbot. We have decided to give it a lot of information, Wikipedia, a lot of specific data. We have given it a lot of data and information in form of a lot of data workers, giving it questions and answers of what are okay answers, what are not okay questions. And then we have given it a task to be an open platform where we can ask any question and we will get an answer in return. So this is what I talk about when I talk about AI. And even more specific, I would like to say that when I think of AI, I think about the high stakes of AI. And I would like to also frame our discussion of today within these high stakes of AI, because AI has also been used in forms of algorithms in the public sector. And in the Netherlands, 27,000 families have been unfairly targeted for fraud. And this had consequences, not only monetary consequences. This really led to social stigma and the certain amount of debt that even put children away from their homes. So that is how much power and decisiveness algorithms have had and have. So when we talk about AI, we need to think about what we do not want with it as well. And luckily we are in this community, an AI inequality community, or a larger or related to AI fairness community, where we think about AI researchers and practitioners who strive for non-discrimination. And a lot of that work, not all of it, but a lot of that work is thinking about this motto, what we do not know, What we do not measure, we do not know. And therefore, focus on these fairness metrics. Is this software working well for everyone? Is it not making mistakes more often for certain groups? I think some of you may have also done the summer program at the AI Equality Hub. I heard also the fairness metrics were discussed there. And there's still something that may be lacking here, because we could question these social welfare scandal in the Netherlands was not a problem for everyone. Some people bore more of that burden, and especially Black single mothers. So can we say that these fairness metrics will actually help these Black single mothers? Luckily, there is also a direction in the AI fairness community that does think about this complexity of discrimination. For example, a metric on Black people and a metric on women versus men cannot capture what happens to Black single mothers. But what if we make a metric specifically for them? A lot of research cites here the famous paper by Bolomini and Gebru called Gender Shades, where they showed that facial recognition software doesn't really work for, especially not for Black women. For darker men, it was not that well, but for lighter females, it worked okay, and for lighter men, it worked okay, but especially for Black women, it didn't work okay. But is that what intersectionality is about? And does that drive us to action that actually helps Black women? And that is exactly what recent critical scholars have asked. Famous papers in the AI ethics community by Kong and by Ilya and her collaborators are focusing on it's more than just measuring errors. Because who gets to decide whether this AI is used? And when someone is facing a problem because there was a mistake with AI, can that person then contest the decision? And next to this great works in the ethics community, also Marie, our collaborator, has made a recent, together with Leila as well, actually was in the call. Great that you're here. I cannot see. Okay. And Jonas also. Sorry, it was a little pop-up in front of it. Great, we have everyone here. There has been great accounts that it's more than just measuring an error. And I like to think about Patricia Hill and Surma Bilge on what they say intersectionality is about. It's about social justice. We need to question whether bringing this AI into the world will actually not make Black women more invisible. Will Black women who will face problems with predictive policing care about that it works better to detect them, or will they care that they're able to contest it? So discussing this kind of critical scholarships that says it's more than just a metric with AI experts, we noticed that in focus groups reading these work, that this critique is received as quite an attack. And these recommendations, because these recommendations are all saying metrics are not the solution, but that's also the first intuition that they may have. That's how the AI education is made. That's how a lot of the jobs for AI scientists are made. So the recommendations that are in these critical works were considered social science, impractical, and outside of scope. But we did a reflection within that group. Why are these recommendations not seen as practical? And it made us think, like, how practical would you find recommendations after being told your way of working is narrow, weak, or not substantive? So that is exactly what our fact paper, like a Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency Conference, was about. What are actionable recommendations for an intersectional approach? Because we looked in the literature, there are a lot of very practical recommendations in the literature. So let's just focus on those and not first spend most of the papers in showing why everything that's been going, what's done right now is wrong. Let's focus on getting the recommendations across to AI experts. We did this by finding them in all the papers, extracting the recommendations through thematic analysis, which just means reading a lot of papers and finding the snippets and interpreting them in a group of people. And we wanted to make sure that these recommendations that we wanted to reformulate really will land with AI experts. So we did another big focus group where we discussed, okay, we try to reframe all these recommendations that you have a first step to start. Does this activate you, or do you still feel attacked, or do you still feel this is impractical? And what could we do to adapt this? And that is, in the end, what we have provided for the AI experts. Perhaps before I move on and share a bit about the recommendation, is this setting clear to all of us here? Or there are small questions before I move on? Okay, great. Then I will move on. I think it will work if I do this. Yeah. So in the paper, you can find all these recommendations with multiple examples, multiple references. And I want to say from here on forward, we will discuss more of these recommendations, and it will not just be from the fact paper, but they're enriched, all of them, by the work by Mears, Wegner, and Strube, and the fourth author I don't know by the heart right now. And also some recommendations were added. So discussing these recommendations with the AI experts, we had first framed them as 5 parallel themes of recommendations that should all be used iteratively throughout the AI lifecycle. But we know that they really would like some sort of linear story to at least start. And although this is imperfect, we wanted everything we would write down to activate AI experts to dare to make a start with this critical approach. So that's why we have made this pictograms or visualization, as you may call it. And I will walk through it with you by elaborating on some of the recommendations. And then we will apply it together to a use case. So please take notes or mental notes of what I'm about to share, because you can use it in a minute. So we have noted in the literature and also my personal experience working a lot with the public sector in the Netherlands that it's often an AI expert, a technical AI expert or a technical AI researcher that gets to decide, I'm going to work on AI fairness, or I have to work on AI fairness. I have to bring that in. Yet our education was not necessarily focused on these ethical questions. So we want to first say, you don't have to bear that full responsibility, but you do get the power at that moment because you are given the task. So insist on inviting different disciplines is our first recommendation. And then you will get different perspectives. You will have your checks and balances within the team, and then try to not only focus on quantitative methods, because I have a lot of experience where we would have an interdisciplinary team, and then the first thing, okay, we have all this data available, and we can measure this, this, or this. Let's ask the social scientists of which one is most relevant. But it doesn't give like a common ground or a safe collaboration space. Maybe we can decide together that yes, we will need to investigate the data and where it comes from, but perhaps an interview study or an ethnography study is actually just as useful here. So that's the first recommendation. Insist and collaborate and know that you have that role of power to insist on it. The second one concerns position and reflection. Then you are in the team, and when I've done multiple interviews with different roles that are together making an AI system, I've noted there's a lot of different assumptions on AI. Some things it's a magical thing, some things it's inherently neutral, some people think it's just going to do what the inspectors before also did wrong. So why don't we come together, assess this recommendation, and discuss these assumptions, write it down. write down who we have in the team and who will this AI actually impact? What is our relation to them? And this is not a one-time thing, but I think it's a good moment when you become your team to write this positionality statement and keep on documenting these different perspectives. Maybe not all perspectives will be listened to in the end, but make sure to write it down so you have the sense of pluriformity. Then, looking at the literature, there were so many recommendations that we need to do community participation or stakeholder participation. And I think Emma can share that this doesn't always work out, because participation for whom and who gets to be in this participation efforts. Therefore, a lot of the recommendations that relate to intersectionality were about co-ownership, or make sure they really have influence and part of it, and then they also get paid. And in my personal experience, and trying to make this a first step for AI experts, I also like to add that the recommendation is to invite, not to make it happen. I've had projects where we wanted to incorporate the labor union, but they wouldn't want to join. And we reported that and we learned from that. Perhaps we reflected, why did they not want to join? Maybe our project needs to change. So I think that's still first steps that maybe will not make it perfect, but will get you to the road of doing an intersectional approach. Fourth is on power and social context. Here, I think the most concrete we can get is powers about who is deciding, social context, and who is this data made. What does fairness mean? Why are people actually treated unfairly? And I like to just make a big poster together, put different persona there, and that's also what the pictogram tries to show, like who is actually deciding on what is made, who is influenced, who is maybe receiving the feedback, but what do we do with that feedback? And doing this exercise together, thinking about narratives, thinking about persona, there's a lot of great recommendations in the paper, will help you shift from thinking, okay, the facial recognition may not work for Black women, but if we think about, do they have contestability? How are these errors received? That we could shift perspectives on, do we want this at all, rather than trying to make it work for Black women? Because if you ask them, they didn't want it to be made. And the fifth one, we have named data and metrics. We're currently thinking about renaming it a bit because it's sometimes a bit confusing, but it's meant here as AI, question mark, measurement, ruler, question mark. Now that you have all these perspectives, let's be critical again on the objective of what we want to do with this AI. Ask this zero question in the activism community, like whether we want to use it. And also compare the potential of using an AI with not using AI at all, or how it's currently being done. Let me check the time. I think I have time for a little anecdote. Yeah, because I worked together with the Labor Market Authority, and there we first got the assignment, can you make a language model that will help detect discrimination in job vacancies? And give us like a proof of concept, and then we'll ask a third party to make it. Okay, so we started doing that in a multidisciplinary team with labor market discrimination people. We asked the College of Human Rights to help. What is relevant discrimination? We talked to the unemployment agency, and we had a whole diverse team, and we started also making the AI language models. And we showed in a very short project that we didn't need the newest language models. Even like the super easy language models that are just called count vectorizer, to just look at frequency of word combinations, could already help the current process. Because we had spoken to the people who do this process currently, detecting discrimination. And I think that was a very nice framing on like what is done now and what are alternatives that we can do. But still there, like 2 years later, I was stubborn and I wanted to check again, like, okay, we checked if it was efficacy, it could work, you know, like, yes, it could work better. Instead of 28 precision, it was 75 precision. when you had put in this language model support. But there's still a lot of other considerations why you would want to use AI in the first place. So we looked also at other risks, such as the deterioration of critical thinking. If an AI keeps suggesting, oh, these job vacancies are wrong, perhaps the inspectors that are using that platform become less critical. So I think this shows a little bit, now that we have more perspectives and people in the team, you can also question. And in the paper, we have some specific ways of doing that. So now, we would like to check with you, what do you get from this? How do we apply it? And by doing that, we would like to use a little use case. And I wrote down some extra information here under. So imagine you get the job to make or research a fairer facial recognition. What do you do? That's the question. Some more context is, with your AI degree and 2 years of work experience, you land a new job for City Hall in the capital of real nation. And to ensure safety, there are currently many guards hired for entry to the City Hall. Yet, due to budget cuts and a national push for innovation, a facial recognition system is considered. The system that will verify identity of all people entering the building by a face scanning device. And with that system, less guards are needed who will do fewer inspections at random. And they're currently also considering using the AI to detect face movements. Then to judge, are your face movements similar to the unruly people we've had before? And if you're then too similar, you will also get an extra padding. So there are a lot of concerns about fairness. So you get this task and get the question, how can we do it? So using these, it's a realistic scenario. And what would you do when you get that task? That's my question. So the first one, according to recommendation, is, okay, let's insist that you cannot do it alone. But then there's still a question, who do you invite? So feel free to share in the chat or raise your hand now to share who you would invite for this collaboration. Oh, chat is here.
So I can also just speak up to make it a bit more interactive, maybe? Or
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would start to invite like those people who did the checks so far, so the security guards, and like because they have the most experience on it. Yeah, but then also like some ethics or like people who have experience in working or representing oppressed groups, or maybe like even better, some people from the oppressed group by themselves. So yeah, those would be my two main collaborators.
Great. Yeah. Anyone have an addition to that? Oh, yes, please go ahead. Feel free to speak up. I think we're indeed a small group. Thank you, Leila.
Yeah, so also I was asking myself, what are the people we do these checks in the first place? Like, what are like these people that get blocked from entry? Like, yeah, so my first reaction was like, why do we need that in the first place to check for people, yeah, for them not getting into the city hall? And then I would ask, what are representatives of those people? Like, maybe there are some patterns that we can see, what kind of people like get rejected entry, and what are the reasons we reject them, and what are the reasons they want to enter even though they're not allowed to enter, and yeah, why don't we allow them to enter?
Yeah. I think these are great additional questions to get more context on what's happening here. There's a reason of I wanted all information to be on the slide, but I think it's also a very realistic use case that sometimes these projects starts without asking that question, and you get this project without actually having any indication on who these unruly people are and what is really meant with that. So I think great questions to start. So let's go to the next one. Then let's say we indeed have found a guard who would like to collaborate, and different roles in the city hall, that the person who is responsible for the AI system, a developer, and another 2 guards, and someone who will maintain the system. They're going to write a positionality statement together. What are relevant things here to put on?
So for me, the first question would be like, who do we want to reject from entry? And to be clear on that, because that's a moral question, and yeah, something that should be transparent, not some like, yeah, oftentimes this is some kind of nebulous framing to justify some kinds of rejections, but yeah, the clearer we can get with the positionality statement here, the more specific we can be and discuss on these moral questions that we have to ask here.
Great. Yeah, we need to identify who is then missing, and we say we're gonna exclude some people entry, and I hear that you want to have identified who these people are to also be able to write that in the positionality statement. I think that makes a lot of sense.
And also the justification. Why do we think it's fair to reject those people, even though this is like, yeah, the central right of people in democracies to have access to these kinds of like public spaces.
Yeah. So here it would be the third recommendation. To better understand this context, I think we have covered this mostly actually now. Do we want to talk to their representative organization? Could we think of some requirements, like what would make this a success if we work with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main points you mentioned earlier for yourself as well, like paying for participation and not saying like it's your free time and your free work, and like not just demanding but also giving something back. I think this is really the main important point there also.
I agree.
And as an addition, I think also to be fully transparent about the workings of the AI system. I mean, as far as it is possible, but to really try to clarify what the system does and what could be fallacies in using it. I think it's also a requirement when working with civil society organizations that are not explicit experts in AI systems.
Yeah. In my experience talking to civil society and also civil society, when I would work, they had this big reports on the technical reports of AI system that would come out and be put on websites, or even the code made available. But what was lacking was the why. And that was actually their biggest concern. Like, how did this come to be? For what purpose? Transparency on why they used to call it. So I think that's indeed very relevant. So here, imagine, and feel free to indeed imagine some additional context details into the use case. Who has decision power here, and who benefits from this AI, and who might be more impacted if we're thinking about the power and social context of this system?
Yeah, so I mean, who has the decision to power is probably the company who also wants to save money by using an AI. But also the company who is producing the AI because they gain money by selling it to an additional company. And then the impacted ones are like either the ones who cannot enter anymore. And I think also what Jonas already had in mind is like if it's biased, and then it's like, yeah, like with a big negative impact on marginalized groups if it's biased. So far we don't know it. But also like those people who are changing their work practices, like the guardians and so on, because they are they have to work and interact with an AI, which they are probably also not trained for.
Yeah, great insights indeed to that. But also the users may also have been a lot impacted.
Yeah, and I think then also maybe, I mean, once you can scan the faces of people entering specific spaces, you also do create a database that down the line could be like really problematic.
100%. The dual purpose of AI systems, or even in the application, is very big. Discussions quickly go from a few enthusiasts, oh, we can also use it for that then. Yes.
Yeah, and then I guess as well, like social context, like, yeah, why do people want to enter this building? Like, yeah, why do we want to forbid it? I don't know. If someone wants to go in there because it's warm, then why should we like not have them in there? And I don't know. I mean, kind of making this up, but I was thinking about who could be an unruly person to enter. So someone not going to work or an appointment, so maybe just someone looking for warm space or something. Yes, but that's kind of a little bit more the positionality statement. But it is really interesting because obviously also power.
Yeah, that's a lot of these projects are under the name of securitization. For security, we will collect or more of your data, more of your privacy. But that's a lot based on fear as well, why we go there. But I don't want to get too political in this part right now. But yeah. And then with the recommendation, the last one is, let's look at this question again. We started with how can we do it? But I've noticed in this discussion, and I was expecting that as well, like what could be a better question rather than how can we do it?
I would ask, do we want to do it?
Exactly.
Yeah, or depends if they frame it under safety. It's like, okay, how can we ensure safety in City Hall? And maybe you don't need a guard.
Yeah. So I'm very happy about this discussion up till now, that we have looked at this case and we had a lot of questions. And I think we are quite critical people as a group already, but a lot of this in the use case could become, okay, what data do we have available? And let's make something. And now going through these 5 steps It's not complete, it's not exhaustive. We have been able to frame and see that we need other people to see what's really happening. We then had to really reflect on, okay, are everyone's voices there? What are our assumptions that it will do? Is this indeed for safety? Will we be able to talk about this to communities? Is there perhaps also other impact, like that we'll create a database, it will be used for different things? And who gets to decide, and who is benefiting from this? Is the city hall indeed not a public service or a space for the citizens in the real nation? So I'm glad that we got this discussion and got into, this is not the question we should be asking, let's ask the how.
I would like to add one thing to the last slide. Could even ask, even like, we could ask a question that goes like one dimension behind this question, if we want to do it. Like, what are the reasons we want to exclude those people? And then, if there are reasons that there are some other people who want to exclude these people from this place. So what are the things these people do or are that make other people want to exclude them? And then the next question is, if there's something that they do wrong in their eyes, what are the reasons these people do these things wrong? So when we ask these questions, we can then start to think about what this specific place, this town hall, I think was the word, right?
Yeah.
Could do to to work with this situation, because oftentimes these short-term solutions, like just excluding them, don't really work. It's just a standoff of power versus looking for other ways to get in or something.
I fully agree. This is exactly the questions to grasp the social context of what does it mean, putting this AI within power relations, the social context. So I think that's indeed great. Thank you so much, Jonas. For the sake of time, I am gonna move on to the question time. Perhaps we could have one or two clarification questions if needed. Is there a little bit an overview to you on what the recommendations are and what they are for and for whom they are? Sorry, Leila.
I know it's all fine. Like I think I got a small question to your framework. So I really like it, and also thank you for presenting it. I wondered a little bit, like also in the use case we've been just discussing about, what if the person reading your guideline is not in the position of power by themselves? So maybe, like as we did it in Common now, we reflected and we said, like, okay, maybe we don't want to use AI, or like we should focus on the security stuff first. But probably all of us had the experience that there's such a big go in the direction of we have to use AI, and if you don't want to use it, you're out of the discussion. So what would you recommend to an AI practitioner who decided, no, we don't want to have face recognition here, but he's like working in this big institute, who is just saying, like, but we have to save money.
Yeah.
So like, what is the power of those people?
Yeah, I think I could skip a little bit forward to one thing I wanted to share, because indeed it's exactly also what I noticed in discussing it with AI experts. Two things came up, like going critical just does not fit my work environment. I can maybe tell it to my manager, but my manager said, well, we got money to make it now, and that's just how it is. But I think these efforts have helped me, and I've been also, I think we need to have like a sign we stop recording here for in previous work experience, where we really were like had to think, okay, I have so many integrity questions even working this project in learning with the public sector on whether we should use this or not. And at one point we tried to make projects two-stage by saying, okay, can we first we ask only for half of the money to spend it on both understanding the problem a little bit better and thinking about alternatives next to technology. And they liked that because it was also kind of maybe saving them money. And we said, can we learn to understand this problem very well? And then we'll do interview studies and critical focus groups to think about why do we actually need this, and to align that common understanding that's often not there in these public sector. But that still is very difficult. And I think doing that will also not only create safety for the people that you have this reflective period in the beginning, but it's also safer for the people who are learning that. Even for me, myself, back at the time, I was also not feeling super safe being in that and raising my voice about everything, but that we had said we're going to learn till that moment and then decide to move on, and then you can decide if you want to be in the team, I think really enabled more critical reflection, which I think is very inherent to the intersectional approach.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah, happy to discuss that more indeed with you, Leila, another time. Yeah.